Welcome to the Black Knight Nation podcast. I'm Sal Interdonato. The Black Knight Nation podcast is sponsored by Higher Echelon. Higher Echelon is a world-class consulting firm that trains employees in sports psychology secrets that drastically improve work performance. Founder Joe Ross is a former Army fullback, former Army assistant coach, and retired Army. And we thank Joe Ross for sponsoring this podcast. Man, this is one we've been waiting for a while. We have Ross Tucker. We welcome Ross Tucker to our podcast. Ross, thanks a lot for joining us.
Sal, it is my pleasure. I love the fact that the day I'm on, Ross Tucker, your sponsor's Joe Ross. That's pretty cool. It works out. By the way, that Higher Echelon Consulting, that sounds amazing on a lot of different levels. I think sports psychology is somewhere where people could really make some significant improvements and strides on the business side or as athletes. I even just, not to digress here, but man, it was tough in the NFL. You know, I remember a few times early in my career when I got cut or had a bad game, even just I had a bad play for the Cowboys, and I spent all night watching. This is 2002, Sal, so I spent all night watching the local news stations, you know, when they had the sports for 3 minutes to see whether or not they blame me for us losing to the Niners. You know, they don't teach you how to handle that when you're 23 years old.
No, and the Higher Echelon actually has a couple of other Army grads who were football players working in the firm, and they also developed an app that Army is used for scouting or recruiting or something, I believe. So, yeah, Joe Ross, a former fullback, he was on Rich Ellerson's staff, colonel in the Army too, retired colonel, I believe, in the Army. So,
well, and Sal, you and I have never really spoken, but I follow you on social media. You're an invaluable resource. In fact, when I first started doing the Army games, I asked the Army Sports Information Department, and they recommended you. You were the person they recommended to follow on social media. So very helpful for me with the recruiting stuff and especially stuff going on with the current team. So I'm glad I get to talk with you, glad I get to follow you. And I don't know if you know this, but my mom was an Army brat.
Okay.
So my mom was born in Fort Lewis, Washington. She graduated from Fort Knox High School in Kentucky. And in between, she went to like 10 different schools. I mean, she was everywhere. She was in Germany twice. My aunt was born in Alaska, Jersey. I mean, all over the place, right? So, you know, I have a very much a soft spot in my heart for any members of the armed services, but especially the Army. I was really tight with my pop-up, who passed away in 2007, coincidentally my last year as a player. And he was a captain in the U.S. Army, served in World War II. And even the jobs he did after that, nothing for him was like being an Army officer. He loved it, would talk about it with me all the time. So that's one of many reasons why I love calling the games for CBS is I like trying to shine a deserved spotlight on all of these young men.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What it's like to call, you know, when I cover the team and can go inside the post and to Mikey Stadium, it's so historic, right? And you just feel like it's an honor just to be there. You know, I'm like, why are they letting me through the gates every time I go through? Yeah, they check my license and stuff like that in my car, but I can't believe they let me through, you know? And it's just like, man, and then from your view in the press box, right? And you can overlook and you see the Lusk Reservoir. I mean, on a Saturday afternoon, where's a better place in college football, really?
Yeah, I mean, so there is not any that I'm aware of, right? So I have broadcast at least one game, or no, I take that back. I've at least been to every NFL stadium and most of the major college stadiums, not all of them, but most of them. And at least from the vantage point of me as a color commentator, there is nothing better than Mikey Stadium. I mean, to be in that press box, and by the way, it's a huge, beautiful booth. I mean, it's like an NFL-style booth for me. I feel spoiled. There's lots of space up there, and then it's always open. And to be able to see the trees and the foliage, and you mentioned the reservoir, and then in the distance, you see the river and everything else. I mean, it is breathtaking. And anybody that follows me on social media at Ross Tucker NFL, you know two things. Number one, before every game, I will do a picture or a video of my view from the press box because it never gets old. I mean, it never loses its luster, for me at least. And then I also will always do a video or pictures of whatever they're serving for the food in the press box.
Yeah,
Which,
I was going
you
to
know
ask you
what?
about
It's
that.
amazing how much people like that. You know, I'll go places now, Sal, and people will say, "Aren't you the press box food guy?" I'm like, oh man. I mean, my parents paid for me to go to Princeton, and I'm the press box food guy. That's what I'm known as.
I was going to ask you about that. I was also going to ask about what's in your fridge type that stuff you do on Twitter the weekend. Maybe we could start talking just about the 2020 season. And, you were able to call all their home games the 2020 season. And, for what they accomplished, that 9-3 record, I think it goes beyond, right? I mean, you could look at the record, but I mean, what they had to go through each week with COVID, what most teams had to go through with COVID, right? But then, man, it was just back-to-back wins over Navy and Air Force or something, right, Ross?
I'm not an Army historian, right? But I have to imagine it was one of the most special seasons in Army football history. And I say that because after what happened in 2019, with a disappointing year, after everything they had accomplished in 16, 17, 18, I really think the onus was on the 2020 group and the seniors to show that what Monken had built was a sustained program and sustained excellence. And then it wasn't just one group of guys that came through, right? Because that can happen sometimes.
Yeah.
To bounce back from the disappointing 2019 year, you have all the COVID stuff going on. And then to play the way they did, I mean, in particular, like I think about that Georgia Southern game. I think about then, obviously, the Navy game, which I actually called on the radio for Westwood One, and then the Air Force game on TV, back-to-back games at Mikey Stadium. Commander-in-Chief, obviously Army-Navy speaks for itself, Commander-in-Chief on the line, and both games close, incredibly exciting games that I'll never forget the goal line stand by the defense against Navy. I'll never forget the job that the offense did on that last drive against Air Force. I'm not from the Army. I went to Princeton, but it was a special season, and on some small level, it felt cool to be part of it, and I could see the enthusiasm and the excitement of the fans. They hit me up on social media a lot. I think that's one thing that maybe people don't realize, Sal, is just, by the way, I'm wearing one of my Army shirts.
There you go.
From Nick Dieterman, the equipment guy. I really appreciate it. He's given me some great gear over the years. But I think it's one thing that maybe most people don't realize. Obviously, you know this. Army football has a really cool following, a really significant and cool following. I mean, there's lots of guys, Captain Chaos from Barstool, and these guys I've never met, like Slums and Gravy. I just know their Twitter handles,
Yeah.
But these guys are absolutely old drunk grad. Like, they're awesome. Like, these guys are awesome, and they're into it, and there's a lot of fans. So I really do. I think Ben always says this as the play-by-play guy, but I really do consider it an honor and a privilege to call those games. And, I don't know, Sal. I feel like on some level, if there's a small void in my life, and very small, I really do wish at some point I had served, and I have so much respect. Like, my daughters know, Sal, if we ever see a man or woman in uniform, they know that if we're at a restaurant, Daddy's going to pay for their meal. And if we're somewhere else, we go up to them. My daughters, they're 9 and 7, Tess and Helen. They are trained to look them in the eye, shake their hands, and say, thank you so much for your service. Like they'll tell me sometimes, we'll be like, somebody will be like, Daddy, there's a soldier over there. I'm like, okay, we got to go. So for me, not having served, being able to shine a spotlight on these guys and really the entire academy is, I think in some small part, I feel like I'm giving back or I'm part of it. Obviously not to any extent what they actually are that are putting the time in and serving us. But I think, I can do my part, I guess, by shining a light on what they did. And this past season, man, I mean, look, by the way, Sal, I still have, where are they? I still have some of my press passes, like Abilene Christian, Citadel. It's funny, some of the better ones I actually sign and give to people that tell me they want them. So if somebody takes advantage of a sponsor on the Ross Tucker podcast or whatever, I'll sign the press pass, send it to them, because there are people, a lot of Army fans that will listen to my other shows, and I'll sign those and send it to them. But it was cool. From our perspective, Sal, I didn't know in mid-August if I would call 0 games last year or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I really didn't. So I think I did 27 games, maybe 13 for college on CBS, 1 Army, Navy, Westwood 1, and then 13 NFL for Westwood 1. So I went from thinking I'd get 0 to somehow I got to call 27 games last year. And honestly, there's nothing I enjoy more.
Yeah, if you're watching right now and you have some comments, please feel free to post them. Any questions for Ross or I? You look at the Army program, Ross. It's a national program, right? It's almost like a global program too, because you have the guys serving worldwide. And I'm trying to get. I've gotten a bunch of guys on this podcast. So I had a General D.A. Sims on earlier this week. He's in charge of the 1st Infantry Division. That's the big red one, the jerseys that they wore a couple Army-Navy games ago. Great following. Most recent, there's been a lot of news about Army. You think it's May, right? And there's what are you gonna talk about with college football? And you have Army last week, Jeff Monken. In Kansas is interest in Jeff Monken, and you had Ollie Villanueva this week, former Army tackle, wide receiver, defensive end, signing with the Ravens. Jon Rhattigan's going to play with the Seahawks, going to get a shot with the Seahawks. Maybe we'll start with Rhattigan first. What a story, right? I mean, just a great story of a guy who just kind of paid his dues, worked hard. Senior year just had an incredible season. And now he's getting a chance to play in the NFL.
By the way, Sal, did you ever hear anything about Santa McCoy in the NFL? Did he try? Did he get any looks?
You know what? They did a pro day at West Point, right? But they didn't publicize it much because I guess with the changeover in presidents, they just want to keep it low key and they want to make sure the policy stays the same. I know that Santa McCoy did work out, did do a pro day, but I haven't heard that he signed with anybody yet.
Because I told a couple scouts about him. I think Santa McCoy, as an NFL prospect, he was a tremendous blocker without the ball, which is the primary thing they want from a fullback.
Yep.
And then every once in a while, they want to be able to throw you the ball, and he can do that. I mean, he's good with the ball in his hands. He kind of reminds me of like Kyle Juszczyk for the Niners, a Harvard guy. Yeah. So I don't know. Hopefully Santa gets a shot at a rookie minicamp or something. I'm thrilled for Rhattigan. What a unique story, right? I mean, to not play very much at all until his senior year and then have such a great senior year, which, by the way, what if COVID had canceled the season? Yeah. Rhattigan might have never actually started a game at West Point. Instead, he has an unbelievable season. They beat Navy. They win the Commanders-in-Chief trophy. And now he gets signed by the Seahawks. And he's so natural in coverage and has such a good background on special teams that I wouldn't be surprised if he made it. I wouldn't at all. I mean, I think he's a guy that's smart enough that he'll be able to back up every spot. He'll be able to play on special teams. I think play effectively because he's got experience on special teams. A lot of these guys, they were stars in college, so they don't have experience on special teams. John really wasn't, so he does. at a minimum, I think he's a great candidate for a practice squad. And it's pretty crazy. You think about Elijah Riley and Cole Christensen and Brett Toth, and you mentioned Villanueva. It's pretty crazy. Army's got a lot of guys that are getting opportunities, at least at the next level, and making money. I mean, Riley and Toth, the guys are Cole, they all made money last year, which I think really speaks to Monken and his staff and John Luce and all those guys and the job they do recruiting. I mean, I've seen it, Sal, because I've got a small recruiting business. Army recruiting over the last 5 years is light years compared to what it was 10 years ago. Yeah. I mean, light years. The number of kids they're getting, the caliber of kids they're getting, they're just recruiting at a different level now. I think it's showing up now with on the field progress and production, but also guys getting a chance to play at the next level.
Yeah, you look at this year's team, the 2021 team, you're going to have a guy like Eric Smith who could maybe get a shot in the NFL. A guy like Nolan Cockrell. Can a guy like Nolan Cockrell, a nose tackle? Maybe he's not a nose tackle at the next level, but maybe he's a defensive end, right? And
he's a 3-4. No, I'll tell you what he is. He's a 3-4 D end, and he's a total badass, and I love that guy. I'm so glad he has another year. I get an affinity for some of these kids. I love Cockrell. I love Eric Smith, the way he plays. Here's the other thing, Sal. Their DBs are going to be really good next year. Yeah. I mean, Broughton and Cunningham are legit. You bring back Jabari Moore and Malcolm Morrison and McDuffie, even guys, Caleb John. I mean, some of these guys, even like their backups made plays last year. What's the kid's name? Cedric Jones?
Cam Jones. Cam
Jones, yeah.
He was everywhere. He
only played in a couple games and he made plays. That's one of the cool things, too, about the Army program is like these kids seemingly come out of nowhere. They'll be third string one week. The next week, Monken will say to me, yeah, he's starting this week. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. And I don't know if it was an injury or COVID. He doesn't tell me that. He just says who's playing. I'm like, okay. And the kids go out and they make an interception against Air Force. It's unreal.
Yeah, it was their depth is their defense is going to be eight starters returning. The defense led the nation total yards allowed per game, right? And you know what, Ross? Maybe watch these guys this year, right, to your liking. Jordan Law and Connor Funekin. Those guys are sophomores. They're going to play tackle for Army, right? Law, I saw getting space a lot when he got his playing time. He got a start here and there as a freshman. And, God, they're moving Connor Funekin from guard to tackle, the right tackle spot this year. Those guys, I think, could be, maybe I'm wrong, maybe a Toth type down the road. They're only sophomores. So.
Well, if you look at Army's team, that's really the only question mark. I mean, they've got most of the defenses back. You referenced that. They're fine in the backfield with the skill, with Tyrell Robinson and Jacoby Buchanan, and all the quarterbacks they have, again. And then even the receivers, they're fine. They don't throw it very much anyway, but they're fine there. The O-line is going to be how quickly, because they do lose a bunch of guys. You think about guys like Reeder. I mean, they do lose some guys up front, guys that were longtime starters. So how some of these other guys come along, will really be sort of a big indicator in their season.
You know what's a crazy stat for them? They have 7 guys on the line who started a game last year that are back, but they lost 4 senior starters.
Right.
So it's crazy. So they have guys who've been in games. So it's not like they're going to be like, oh crap, here's the opener against Georgia State. What am I supposed to do? No, they've been in games. So
yeah, it's a good point. And that's one of the benefits of the injuries they've had is they've had to play a bunch of guys. But you know what? They do a good job rolling guys through anyway. They'll get guys like, Dean Powell, like he'll get some reps, right? So he's ready to go. They'll play a couple centers like Bishop and Knapp. So those guys will be, they don't flinch when it's their turn. And the other thing is they always have guys show up seemingly as seniors who never played before that all of a sudden play at a high level. I think about, Mike Johnson's a little bit of a different story, but he was awesome last year. You think about, Jack Sides. They have guys that seemingly come out of nowhere and play really well for them.
No doubt. Well, we're going to wrap this up. I just wanted to get your quick thought on the Monken news last week. The Army Black Knight Nation was on standby because it looked like that he was going to. All reports were saying they were pretty deep into negotiations with Kansas. He ends up staying. I think it's definitely no doubt a win for Army and maybe a breath of fresh air, a sigh of relief, so to speak, for the Army fans because he didn't go to Kansas.
Well, he's obviously done an outstanding job. I think he is very deserving of a Power 5 job if he gets offered it, and that's what he wants to do. I think it's interesting that Kansas was looking at both he and Lance Leipold. I did a UB game last year. I've done a couple of UB games. Very similar guys, very similar backgrounds. They've done it at multiple levels, mindsets. They both run the ball a lot. I think the difference is Leipold does it more with the outside zone, and Monken's done it more with the option stuff. We'll see if it works for Kansas. If I were them, I probably would have gone with Monken and tried to run the option stuff. I think that's their best chance for success. But look, I call the Army games. I don't call the Kansas games. So I'm happy that Monken's staying. He's been an awesome guy to work with. The thing that's great though now is, Sal, even if at some point he does leave, I really think he's built the structure here for sustained success. And you think about after he left Georgia Southern, Willie Fritz came in and they were good. And then after Fritz left, they've still been good. They're still good at Georgia Southern. So I think there are some candidates potentially, and I won't say them, but in my mind, if Jeff ever did leave, I think there are guys on the current staff that would be great to get promoted and to continue what Jeff has built. But yeah, selfishly, I enjoy working with him and talking with him. I just really appreciate his approach and what he's been able to accomplish. And I'm looking forward to them hopefully having another great year in 2021. I've got my schedule ready. I'm constantly saying to the CBS guys, hey, I can do the away games too if you need me to. Whatever you want me to do, I'm happy to do because I enjoy it so much.
Absolutely. The 2021 season will be here before you know it. Their home opener is against Western Kentucky on September 11th. Yeah, I bet you're getting the scouting report in Western Kentucky soon. So, Ross, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes of your busy schedule to join us today. And if you want to plug anything of yours before we go off, please feel free to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sal. I'd be happy to come on again. I know that I don't know if there are any other Army football podcast, but this is certainly the best one that I'm aware of and know of. And following you on Twitter has been a pleasure for me. If anybody's interested in my social media, I'm at Ross Tucker NFL, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you're on, you can follow me there, especially during football season if you're obviously an Army fan. And then I've got a lot of podcasts I do that I really enjoy. It's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Is daily, mainly NFL stuff. If you're into fantasy football, I've got the Fantasy Feast. If you're into making games a little bit more interesting, I've got the Even Money podcast and all that stuff, by the way, you can actually watch as well. YouTube.com/Ross Tucker NFL.
Ross, it's been awesome. Really appreciate it. We'll do it again soon. And all the best, man.
Absolutely. We got to do it again either before the season or during the season sometime.
Absolutely.